Rich Cole, 25 years ago, you introduced me as the new pastor at this church. And in honor of my silver anniversary of living in and out of Grand Haven, I want to take you to Mary's Country Kitchen. Now, Mary's Country Kitchen is located in Florida, about 20 miles east of Leesburg, Florida. And as we were looking for the place, we meandered around the county road, finally came to this shack that was surrounded by cars, and if it hadn't been the cars there, we probably wouldn't have gone in. But Mary's Kitchen impressed me because of its hominess. I don't remember the food that well, but what I remember is plaques that were hanging around the wall. And I even got up and meandered around looking at some of the plaques. But the one that got my attention with old sayings on it was the one near our table. And I took out the Sunday bulletin and wrote it down, saying, I'm going to use that. Now, as a backdrop to this, you need to remember that I grew up with a mother that cooked out of an old 5-gallon pail of lard. So keep that lard can in mind. And when she was going to do eggs or cookies or whatever, she'd reach down and grab a gob of lard and throw it in. So with that in mind, the saying said this: if common sense was lard, some people would not have enough to grease a fry pan. And as I have dealt with people through my years, I've noticed that's somewhat true. There are some people that just have a shortage of common sense, or they wouldn't do the dumb things they do. An Old Testament reading that I was going to incorporate today with readings, but I thought, well, I'll just tell the story. Moses has led the people out of Egypt. They've been in captivity, and they come to the Promised Land. And Moses calls up 12 individuals, one from each tribe, and said, I want to send you out to be spies. The Promised Land's just over the hill. I want you to go in and see what kind of land it is. 40 days later, that good biblical number, the spies come back and they report in. And they are all in agreement. It's a beautiful land. The clumps of grapes are the clusters are just great. It's a great place to graze our sheep. There's water. It's a great land. And Caleb said, let's go in and claim it. And the others said, now wait a minute, you got to hear the other side. There's people living there. They're a strong people. They have vast armies, and there's no way we can conquer that land. But Caleb said, have you forgotten who we are? Have you forgotten all that God has done for us over these past generations and just in the last few months of getting us our freedom? Have you forgotten that? We can go in and conquer it with God's resources available to us. But the other side, the pessimistic side, was so vocal that they backed off. They did not go in to claim the land and continued to meander in the desert for many more years. As we approach life, I want us to remember that we are people who have the resources of God at our disposal, that we have all kinds of things available to us. Now, last week, I boycotted Pastor Jack's exit from here because I had a chance to go to Sparta. So it was nothing personal that I wasn't here. But Sparta is where our new pastor is coming from. And it's also the church that I went to 40-some years ago. It was so long ago that my daughter stood about this high. And I went back to remember and connect with people. And as I thought about the sermon that I wanted to put together, I was overwhelmed by the number of people that came to mind without even looking at the old pictorial directory. People who had deeply affected my life. And I thought, wow, which reminds me of another quote that I've used at Ida's, the Hat Lady's memorial service. I think it's Elizabeth Sheehan says, it's Madeline Sheehan that said, "There will always be a reason why you meet people. Either you need them to change your life, or you're the one who would change theirs." And that saying really hit home because, in the middle 30s, I was at the top of my game. I could preach good sermons. My mind was alert. I can recognize people and call them by name. And now I just recognize people. But, I thought I was really someone. And I discovered in looking back, maybe I touched a few lives, but the more powerful impact was they touched my life. Even a small baby that died after 8 days. I called the mother and said, "Mary, do you mind if I talked about Jamie?" And she said, "No, he would have been 43 this year." Just like that, she remembered her son who had died many years ago. But that little baby, who I was too close to in some ways, taught me, Eldon, if you're going to be a pastor and you're going to deal with funerals, you better learn to deal with your grief before you get up front and lead the service. I could go on and on with a number of stories. Bill Rogers, that usually sits in the back row, I don't see him today, but Bill's from Sparta. Chuck and Edna Rogers, his parents, said to me, "Now someday when you're free, we want to take a trip." I said, "Okay." And so I finally gave them the date, and they load us in their motorhome, and I'm not sure if Julie remembers this, but where do you think they took us? To the Grand Haven State Park. And they said, "This is the greatest place." Little did I know that many years later we'd be living here. But they were right. This is the greatest place. People impacted my life. Now, as I think about the impact of people on our lives, I've got to ask, now who's this new kid coming to town? To me, Lou's a kid, all right? Pastor Lou, who's coming to town. He'll be here next Sunday. And I wonder who's going to impact whose life. Will we be an impact on his life? Will some of you touch him personally? Or will he touch us personally? I don't know how that's going to work, but we're going to find out. In Florida, we're going through a pastoral change at the Morrison United Methodist Church, which is a big, stately building. I love the stained glass windows in it. They're going through tough times, and a new pastor comes, and he and I do not connect. Some preachers touch you, others don't. For whatever reason, this guy just doesn't move my heart. And the other thing that I don't like about him is he hasn't given me... that came out wrong. The other thing that I go to church for is to hear really good sermon illustrations that I can steal and bring back here. And that's been kind of low. But as I hear the vibrations around the church, I'm pleased because he has connected with the laity. He has connected with the people that work with him in committees. The people like him. He brings a personality that the other guy, who was more a pulpiteer, lacked. He was more of a dictator, but this guy, more collegial, works with people fine. And so I said to my wife, this might be a good time to visit other churches. Not church shop, mind you, but visit other churches. And so we did some research that I could use in future use. And we went to the Baptist church. And I've wanted to go there for several years because they pack them in there. They do a good job of ministry. And as the ushers are busy filling the pews, they start a video. And on that video, they ran the announcements. They had an update from some of the things going on. They had a video from their homegrown missionaries who were serving someplace in Africa, I think it was, a video report that we could actually see them and their work behind them. They had also an update from the satellite church they were starting at the villages of how that work was going from the pastor that was up there. It was entertaining, it was well done, it wasn't boring. I was pleased. Now, as we look to the future and look at various things that we need to do, one of the things that we've done well, and I applaud us all for that because I was a part of it, is we've done well at maintaining our buildings here. And I was kind of shocked when I went back and realized that since I've been here, we have spent over $1.5 million in new additions, church repairs, parking lot, renovations, on you go. That doesn't even include the interest, I don't think. We've done well at beautifying our campus. Maybe what we need to do in the next 20 years is put them just $25,000 to $50,000 a year into programming, finding people that will lead us in the direction we want to go. Now, some say we ought to make better use of the Wiltsey Center. We could have exercise classes going on there. We could have some basketball games after school. We could do a variety of things. I think we could do a better job of filming what goes on in our community. What if our VBS director, Laura, could have taken our cameraman over to VBS and really showed us what went on there by, as she talked this morning, that could have been running in the background. As we do announcements, rather than have someone come from that place telling about their work, what if we had someone that went out and visited them so that when they talked, there was the ability to see where they worked, what was happening in the people's lives who were affected. Now, some people want another associate pastor, and I hear you on that because historically that's been a part of our life. But in today's economy, that's pricey. You got to pay $40,000 probably. You got to pay health care. You got to pay retirement, pension fund. You got to pay for parsonage, someplace to live. You got to pay for it. You can get up over $120,000 for an associate pastor in no time. And just when you get to like them, they move. But if we found people that are skilled in a variety of areas, part-time people, whatever, and scattered programming in a number of ways, I wonder what might happen. Now, that's just my thinking, but one of the things that we need is just a little bit of pinch of salt, a beam of light, some common sense, and I think we're going to be amazed by what happens in this church. Now, as I said, when I went back to Sparta, things had changed. The 90-year-olds came out to see me, but there weren't too many others that knew me. In 40 years, I don't know what this church is going to look like. I don't plan to be here. I plan on moving on. But there will be a lot of people here. And the ministries that they're involved in will have a lot to do with what we do in the next 10 years with Pastor Lou. Now, some of us will really like him. Some of us will say, well, he doesn't do much for me. But some of us may be able to inspire him to move in certain directions. Some of us may be able to say, you know, I have a pastor friend who's now in his 80s. He and his wife both worked. They have a great pension plan. And he said, we've finally realized that all we can do for the church anymore is to pray and to contribute financially. And there may be people like that in this church who say, you know, I can't do the work anymore, but if you've got a program that really turns this church on, I'm willing to contribute a little extra for that. because I've experienced that in my lifetime here and in other places. I don't know the answers to what lies ahead, but if we ask the right questions, we're going to find God moving in our midst and doing things. Now, I really like to read big books, and this is about the size that I come back to a lot. And this one I picked up at the library, and the title caught my attention. Wait, what? It's a good question to ask your kid or your teenager when they're heading out the door. Wait, what are you going to do? Let's talk about that. I need more information. But the writer says, to get the answers of what lies ahead, you need to ask questions that are good questions. The other illustration that I'll draw from James Ryan was he's talking about being in the Netherlands, and he's out jogging one morning, and he notices that the grass ahead is different than the grass he's running on. He didn't stop and ask any more questions. He simply ran into the canal, which was covered with this green slime. It would have been an appropriate time to really ask more questions. Now, why does that look different up ahead? What's the territory I'm running in? And is there a chance that might not actually be grass that lies ahead? So I don't know what the future holds, but I know that we are in the hands of God, and God's going to lead us in the direction we're going. The new pastor in Florida. I was across the road in our Florida park talking to Audrey. Audrey has gone through some tough times, and I went over and I thought, you can be a pastor to her. Reach out. So I went over and talked, and she dumped on me. She just shared all that she'd been going through. And either she or I, or the conversation came up about church, and she said, well, we used to go way up north. It's too far, and they've had a change of pastors, and, she said, where do you go? And I said, Morrison United Methodist. She said, oh, that's so big. I wouldn't know where to park. And I said, you want to go to church with us? She said, yeah. Next Sunday at 10 after 8, we pick her up, take her to church. She loves the new pastor. It's amazing. He spoke to her and communicated to her right where she was hurting. And it was amazing, the transition. She hardly missed a Sunday afterwards, even when she started going on her own. I don't know what lies ahead, but I know that with a little salt and a beam of light, God is going to continue to bless us. Friends, you survived me. You can get through anything. It's just another way of looking at it, if nothing else. So, Moses and the spies. Spies went out and talked about the future. But it was only Caleb that said, we can do this. I hope that you're a Caleb and can say, when ideas come up that are far-fetched, just maybe we can do this. Now, another guy that affected my life in Sparta was Lynn Bradford. Lynn was one of the largest dairy farmers in the country. And I went out to visit him, he and his wife. And in the midst of the conversation, he said to me, Eldon, you're a pretty good preacher. And then the but. But you don't wrap it up. You don't have a good conclusion. Why don't you read guideposts and get some good stories and use them? So with Lynn Bradford in mind, I close my sermon with this little illustration. A couple is in Europe. They stopped at an outside cafe to order tea and crumpets. And while they're there, every now and then there's this aroma. And there's no flowers around, and they can't pick up what's going on, and then it appears again. So they asked the waitress when she came by and said, tell us about this aroma. What's going on? And she said, oh, there's a perfume factory up the road, and the workers just got out of work. And as they walked by, the aroma from their work floats everywhere. Jesus said to us, "Taste and see that the Lord is good." I think it was the psalmist that said that rather than Jesus. I think we are people who have experienced Christianity, and we ought to share that just by the aroma of our lives. A little bit of salt, a little bit of zest, a little bit of joy, a little bit of happiness sharing with those around us. What a difference it can make.